Hey everyone, just a few quick things before we get started. Don't forget to sign the attendance sheet. It's just real simple. Just ask you 2 questions. Kind of looks like this. But that's pretty much it. Please enjoy. Hope you all learned something.
Okay, hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be going over this worksheet. This is going to be all about input, output, and output formatting. So this is very important for this class, so I'd really take this into consideration. Alright, so we're first going to get started with this question, and it says, what is cout and how do we use it? So by now, in case you didn't know, cout is used to output things from the code to the terminal. Like after, when you hit the run code, it's going to output this to the bottom. And so how do we use it? We use it by typing cout and 2 less than signs and then whatever we want to output. So let's say I wanted to output hello world and then close quotes, and then you can do another 2 less than signs and then inline. And so whenever you want to output words or something like letters or characters or anything, you need these quotes around whatever you're going to output. And you always want to have these less than signs when you're outputting. And this inline here is just going to start a new line. For example, if this is what was outputted, it just start a new line like that. If you didn't have an inline, and if you just closed it off like that, you would not have any less than signs, and the semicolon would just go after the quotes. And then your cursor would remain on the same line that you output hello world in. Okay. So the next question is how can we output multiple things at once? So let's say we just cout 2 less than signs, carets, hello world, right? And then what we can do is, let's say I don't think I'm done with this. I want to continue adding like stuff on the same character. You can put more less than signs and then open up brackets to continue outputting on the same line. So I'm gonna put some spaces because it won't output spaces for you. You have to remember that if you're doing something like this, you need spaces. So I'm gonna output 2 spaces, or 1 space, and put it's Ferris. Oops, I misspelled my name. Alright. Close quotes, and then I'm going to end it like that. And so you can use this concept with multiple things. Like if you have variables instead, you could do cout x. You don't need quotes if you're doing a variable. But if you're doing a variable, it won't print out x. It's going to print out the value of x, right? So we have x, you could do y, and then you could also do z. And so you probably want to format it better than that. Like you'd probably want to go back in and do, well, let's add some spaces so we can tell what the difference is, right, between the 2 variables, or between the numbers. Because, I mean, let's say x, y, and z were 1, 2, 3 respectively. Then your output would have looked like that. With spaces, it'll look like that. So there's a lot of different formatting output you can do, and we'll get into that a little later as we go down, but to output multiple things at once, you just need to separate it with these little less than carets. Okay, so the next question I have is, what is the command to receive an input from the user? Alright, so cout, right? If we're coding in C++, and we want to output, just delete the, cout, right? But if we're coding in C++ and we want input, then we can just delete the put and the plus, and you get cin. So basically, the command is cin. I like remembering it by C out, output, C in input. Alright, yeah, and then so it's just C in. And so to use this command, so this is going to be a little tricky, a little bit more complicated than C out. So if you think about it, and you're like, hey, user, I'd like you to give me a number. And they're like, okay, I'm going to give you the number 2. And then you're like, okay, great, I have this number 2. I need somewhere to put it. So before you can use cin, you're going to need a variable to store the value in. So if you, okay, but once you have the variable to store the value in, once you do that, you're like, hey, I need you to give me a number. And they're going to be like, okay, well, I give you 2. So to put it in, to use it, what you do is you do cin. And so you're going to want to point your arrows the opposite way you point C out. So greater than, and then the variable, let's pretend like I already declared an integer. And then we can do cin y. And this one doesn't get an inline because it's automatically going to do it for you. And so the way I remember these arrows, and I get them confused all the time, sometimes you're just not thinking, but one trick to remember which way the arrows point for C out and cin, you're storing something in a variable. So these arrows are always going to point towards the variable since that's where you're putting in the information. And just to let y'all know, if you were to have int y is equal to 0, and then you were to cin and they gave you 2, y would be equal to 2 after, right? So whatever you cin will override what's already there. But this is all you need to do to use the command. Okay, so the next question I have is, what does setWidth do? So setWidth is going to give a minimum space for an output. So it's kind of like a reservation at a restaurant, right? So it's like you're calling ahead at a restaurant, right? It's like, hey, I have a table for 7. Do you think we could be seated at 7:30 or whatever? And so, you go in and they already have a table set up for you with 7 specific people. And so an important thing to note, though, is it only holds a minimum. So it only, does a minimum. So unlike a restaurant, those are kind of like a restaurant. Like, let's say only 5 people show up to the reservation. Well, then you have 2 extra chairs there at the 7 set-up table. That's okay. It does a minimum. So if you have a set width of 7 and you only have a 5-character word, the extra 2 is still going to be there, and no one else will be able to use them. But, so, what I mean by only does a minimum is, let's say, you set a 7 character, you set with 7, and you have 9 characters. So, what this means is you can still go past the set width. It's not going to cut off whatever you're trying to output, but it's just not reserved, okay? So, let me put, actually, let me change this to doesn't cut off if you go over. So, back to the reservation, you come in with a party, said you're going to have a party of 7, you come in with a party of 8. Hey, sorry, last minute my friend decided to join. So they're like, okay, no big deal. You pull up a chair at the table, and there you go. It didn't really hurt anything, but that chair wasn't reserved specifically. Yeah, and that's kind of like what it does. One important thing you do need to know about it does have its own library. So you're going to want to do hashtag include, not in caps, include caret io man ip. So IO, like IO stream, and then I always do like man, as in like a man, and then ip. You kind of just have to memorize some of these things. So for set width, you're going to want to have this library, otherwise you won't be able to use it. Okay. So the next question I have is, what does set precision do, and what are the add-ons? So, okay, so set precision, let me say, also uses IO manip. So uses IO manip. I'm just gonna not put it in the include right now, but so y'all get it. So set precision. Okay, so set precision defines the number of sig figs to output. Okay, so if you have a decimal, like, right, if you have pi and your rational decimal goes on forever, obviously you don't want to output all of pi. So if you were to do set precision 3, it would only output 3.14. So 3 sig figs. But let's say you wanted to do something like to the thousandths, so like you wanted a certain number of places, but after the decimal point. So that's going to be fixed. And these are the add-ons, right? So fixed defines the number of sig figs to output after the decimal point, right? So anything to the right of the decimal. It won't count in like 3.14, it won't count the 3. Alright, and next, the other add-on that's pretty useful is show point. So let's say, you know, you're working on a programming project and he wants you to output everything to the thousandths. And coincidentally, one ends on its 4.120. By nature, fixed and set precision won't output this 0 because trailing zeros are not sig figs. So show point will show zeros after the decimal. So this can be useful. Okay, and so let me just give you a little example of how to use this. And say you were to see out, you could do set precision 7, right? 7. Well, let's use decimals. So we'll do 3. Okay. Oh, actually, I'm gonna go do this on online GDB just so we can see it run. Okay, so I have online GDB all set up here. Right, like we'd use a normal, except, what does it say right here? Set precision uses IO manip. So what we will do is we'll go back up to the top, hashtag include IO manip. And so now we can use set precision. Right, so let's say we have a double called y and it's equal to whatever this number right there is. Okay, so now let's see out it to 3 sig figs. So now if we run it, we get 2.54, right? But let's say we want it to the thousandths, so we need the extra decimal place. Then we can do fixed like this, and if you run it, we get 2.544. It rounded up to 3, right? Because there's a 6 behind it. Right, and let's pretend like we're going to change all these to zeros. So it's like a whole bunch of zeros like this. Now if we were to run it like that, we would get that. Okay, so I tried it out, and apparently NetBeans just outputs the 02. But so I guess you don't really need to worry about show point. But if you are having issues not getting zeros to show after the decimal, so sorry about that. I didn't realize. But yeah, anyways, to just use show point, it would be. I wonder. What does show? Anyways, if you were using show point, it would just be something like that, like you did with fixed, and then it shows the point. Yeah, and so if you see, if you don't have it and you don't have fixed either, it doesn't show the 0. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Apparently fixed and show point aren't needed together, but you know, it's there. Okay. So the next question I have is, how do you line output to the left or the right? And so this is going to be really easy. You just type left, or you type right. And you want to use it just like fixed. You just do left, like that. Okay, so the last question I have is, list a few useful escape sequences. So these are just going to be the ones with like the slash. So /t results in a tab, like outputted, right? // will output a / quotes. These are useful for like if you're trying to output like a quoted saying, right? Output quotes, and you want the same thing with a single quote, you know. Okay, and the only thing is going to be a /n, and this just starts a new line, so it does the same thing as inline, except you'd use that like in like quotes or something.
Thank you all for making it all the way through this video. Here's a little way of saying thank you.